Hey, welcome to Dad's Toolbox for Eating Disorder Recovery, Practical Tips and Skills for Caregivers. My name is Sabrina. I am with the Eating Disorder Foundation, and I'm very happy today to be introducing you to our speaker and helping facilitate some of the questions for this evening. Tonight's workshop is brought to you in collaboration with the Eating Disorder Foundation and EQUIP. So a little bit about the Eating Disorder Foundation. We are a nonprofit in Denver. Our mission is to be an effective resource in the prevention and elimination of eating disorders through free and accessible education, support, and advocacy. We are a Denver-based location and very, very lucky to now be serving the nation and even folks and families internationally. EQUIP is a treatment modality, a treatment center. So EQUIP makes gold standard eating disorder care accessible to all people through family-based treatment delivered at home for lasting recovery. Created by experts in the field and people who have been there, EQUIP builds upon this model of care by providing families with a dedicated 5-person care team, including a therapist, a dietitian, a physician, and peer and family mentors. I'm going to, in a moment, put some links in the chat so that if you would like to learn more about EQUIP or reach out to their senior manager, Jessica Hickman, she's an excellent resource and can answer any questions about EQUIP. And I will also put a link, an email address for the Eating Disorder Foundation if you're not already familiar with our family and friend support groups or individual groups. We also have a mentorship program that's a little different than maybe what we'll hear about in today's presentation. I'd like to take a moment and quickly thank everybody who donated for tonight's event. This is how EDF is able to continue providing free resources. So I appreciate everyone who was able to do that. When you have questions throughout the presentation this evening, please feel welcome to use the chat. We'll save probably 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the hour to address some of those questions. And now I am happy to introduce and share a little about our speaker tonight, Kevin Dunn. Kevin is the director of the Family Mentorship Program at EQUIP and the leader of their men's group. Kevin also co-founded the FEAST Men's Support Group, which is another wonderful organization. The FEAST stands for Families Empowered and Supporting Treatment for Eating Disorders. And Kevin created this group with the goal of activating, educating, and motivating men to be more supportive and effective caregivers. And I'm going to let Kevin share a little bit more with you from here. So again, please feel welcome to use the chat. It will come to me privately, and in a moment, I'll put the links in there. And Kevin, thank you so much for being here tonight. We have a lot to learn from you.
Thank you very much, Sabrina, for the introduction and for allowing me to be here. And I'm thrilled to see so many faces. And so I just wanted to say hello while I can see your faces. I was going to put and am going to put a presentation on the screen, but at that point I lose touch with some of the faces. So I wanted to say hello, and I hope that at the end to have some time, as Sabrina said, to take some questions. So please, during the discussion, if you have a comment, thought, question, please put it in the chat, and we'll look forward to having time to address it. So let me share my screen with you. Bear with me here for just a second. And as Sabrina said, today we want to talk about a dad's toolbox for eating disorder recovery. Practical tips and skills for caregivers. And I want to let you in on a secret here. Yes, in the title it says dads, but the secret is that this isn't just for dads. This is for anyone who's a carer. And if a dad cannot be here this evening, or even if a dad is here this evening, this information is meant to be shared. And it's meant to, as Sabrina said, along with the objective of the Men of Feast, to activate, educate, and motivate, so that we all become better carers, more supportive of our loved ones. So let's move right into talking about the toolbox. And as Sabrina mentioned, I lead the men's group at Equip and also lead and helped co-found the Men of Feast, which is the Feast men's group, and a little bit capsule version of why I'm here and why I'm passionate about this topic of family mentorship and supporting our loved ones. I'm the dad of a daughter who's in recovery. She was diagnosed, dual diagnosis with anorexia nervosa, restricting subtype, and later on ARFID. So she's in recovery now, doing quite well. I am certainly aware, as she is 13 years old, that we have a long way through adolescence. So we remain vigilant here. And that's part of the motivation process that I like to bring to other carers, that there is hope for complete recovery. And you certainly, as you gather tools in the toolbox that we're going to talk about, don't throw those away after their use, because they're what we want to utilize as tools in our learning. We want to practice the tool use so that we utilize skillful means. Why? And why not throw them away after we're in recovery? Because what we all want for our loved ones is effective coping mechanisms. And when we model this tool use, these skills for them, that can help them along the path. So let's talk about some objectives that we hope to discuss here. And I'll move through these fairly quickly because, again, I definitely want to leave time for questions. We want to consider reasons to prepare our toolbox. What's it look like to prepare that toolbox? And what am I going to learn? We want to learn why carers may need to retool. Certainly at some point in life, you probably think, as many of us have who've come to eating disorder treatment, I know what I know and I'm going to move forward with what I know. And what we come to find out is there are new tools that we can add to the repertoire, new strategies, and we can become skillful in implementing them. We want to understand the need for continual change during this challenge. So one of the goals is certainly to allow us as carers, as parents, as family members, to understand that change will be a continual process. None of us as family members, carers, parents, caused eating disorders. However, to move through the process of treatment successfully and effectively, all of us need to change in some ways. And we want to consider as the final objective some of the tools that you can begin using immediately. So how does this toolbox work? And first of all, what is the toolbox? It's us. We're the toolbox. We're bringing on education, resources, seeking support to enhance our own capabilities to provide effective support for our loved ones. We're the toolbox. We acquire tools for different uses, and when their use is practiced, a skill is developed. So there's the differentiation when you hear the word tool and skill used in this context. The tools are the resources that we're learning about within the community. And as we practice what we learn, we develop skill in supporting our loved one. So let's take a look at what radical acceptance of a current reality, which is an eating disorder diagnosis, looks like. What happens when we feel stress? So when a diagnosis is provided, or when we see certainly that our loved one needs support, we feel stress. And imagine what our loved one is experiencing. But let's shift for this discussion with what we're experiencing, back to what we're experiencing. Let's take a look at 3 brain areas very briefly. And this is all to serve the purpose of preparing our toolbox. Where and in what portion of the brain do we best learn? So when we're stressed and reacting emotionally, we're typically working out of the reptilian brain and the limbic system, the limbic brain. So the amygdala is like the smoke detector for your body, and it sounds the alarm when we're under stress. Okay. When we're working out of the limbic system, we're looking to have a couple of questions answered. Am I safe? Am I loved? Now, a little later on, we're going to talk about how those questions apply to our loved ones. So I want you to keep that in mind. We're not, when we feel danger, when we feel and are experiencing stress, we're not necessarily able to access the neocortex, the rational or thinking brain. Okay, and the rational and thinking brain is where we're going to be doing the majority or all of our learning. And if we are unable to access what we have learned, then it's very difficult to use skillful means. It's difficult to put the tools to implement the tools. So that's what this is all about. Trying to find ways, methods for us to manage the stress that we feel as we're supporting our loved one toward recovery. So adapting to change, you heard me mention that this is going to be a continual process. It just won't be minor changes here and there at one time. It will be changes along the path, more than likely multiple. So what does that mean for us when we're at a particular point in life where we're doing okay? We feel that, you know, at this particular point, maybe we've learned what we need in order to parent. Becoming a beginner means discovering the power of and by appreciating nonlinear progress and adopting a change mindset. The change mindset is, I come to eating disorder treatment and supporting my loved one without a playbook. And that's okay. I'm here to learn. I'm here to be educated by the community, by resources that I will find and gather. I'm here to be a beginner, and I'm not afraid to admit that. That opens you up to all kinds of possibilities. And I'd like to emphasize that just a little bit later in terms of the phases of change that we all go through. The nonlinear progress portion of this, when you're a beginner, we certainly would like to think that as we bring new tools on board and utilize them, we're immediately going to have a trajectory towards accomplishment or complete recovery or success. And nonlinear progress, the path of eating disorder recovery, shows us that that's not always the case. There will be dips and turns and plateaus, and that's okay. That's actually expected. So let's take a look at what I mentioned, the phases of change. Over time, which is the bottom axis, how does our effectiveness increase, which is the vertical axis? Let's take a look at what all of us experience when there's an eating disorder diagnosis or when we're confronted with the behaviors when we know our loved one needs support. We typically experience denial, okay? And that looks like fear. We experience fear. We try to avoid the situation or escape from it. So denial is something that is not something that can be eradicated. It's one of the phases of change. We all experience it. It's for the length of time that we experience it that's important, because the next phase, in the next quadrant, going counterclockwise here, we see resistance. Okay, so maybe we're becoming aware that the current reality is upon us, but we're resisting it. We're fighting the reality. That can lead to anger and frustration. So the radical acceptance piece of this, and radical acceptance is a tool which when practiced becomes a skill. Radical acceptance, which we'll also talk about in just a bit, says, I'm going to see this reality as being, it is what it is for now. I don't agree with necessarily all aspects of this reality, but I do accept that it is what it is. There is suffering in our family. My loved one is suffering. And when you accept rather than fighting against the reality, you can utilize the energy that you would have spent fighting the reality in fighting the eating disorder. To get to the next quadrant of change, we start to see some parental empowerment to bring us into what's called the exploration phase. This is where you're looking for resources, learning, and support. Okay, anyone who's here this evening is more than likely moving into or already in this phase. And you might say, well, there's some denial, there's still some resistance, and that's understandable. These lines between quadrants are not hard and fast. If you look at the burnout circle there, often when we're dipping between quadrants and we're exploring resources, but we're still resisting the reality, we start to lose traction and we can burn out. We can also dip back into denial. So what's beyond exploration when we've gathered our resources is commitment. Commitment does not equate with complete recovery. Commitment equates with acceptance that this adaptation to change, these phases of change are continually going to be revisited. That's what the commitment is. And I'm committing to needing to change as we move through this process. Parental empowerment. So it was indicated on that phases of change chart. What's it about? In a nutshell, there's a couple of aspects that I'd like to talk about. Being right versus being effective. I'd like to empower carers to know that being effective is much more important as we support our loved ones on the path to recovery than being right. So we can focus our energy on what works rather than being, as we'll talk about again a little bit later, willful, wanting our way or bringing our needs to the table in the primary position. We focus what we are learning and what we're able to do on what works. We may have a prejudgment that it's not necessarily right or the way you would like to see things unfold, but focusing on what works is effective. So that's for right now in this moment, not forever. It's for now. So rather than judging something as being right or fair, we move forward with what's effective. And understanding the dialectic. If there happen to be multiple caregivers in a particular scenario, multiple carers, we all approach eating disorder treatment from different perspectives and come to it with different ideas about how things should move forward. There's a dialectic at play, which is an opposing viewpoint. We need to understand that resolving those perspectives is not necessary in order to move forward. So it's understood that you will have different perspectives. As long as we're both or multiple carers going in the same direction, it's okay to have those disagreements. So the ultimate goal, complete recovery. As long as we're focused in that direction and moving that way, it's okay. We don't have to resolve our differing perspectives. So let's take a look at externalizing the eating disorder, which is one tool that often derails that moving forward, that parental empowerment piece. So externalizing the eating disorder is truly all about choosing a model that works for your family for alignment. And when I talk about alignment, what I mean is you, if it's if you're the carer on the scenario, if there's a multiple, you and other carers in alignment with your loved one, in opposition to the eating disorder. So that's what I'm talking about, a model, so that you have it clear in terms of how are we moving forward. And you might say, well, that's pretty basic. Of course, it's carers and our loved one in opposition to the eating disorder. But we often surprise ourselves in stressful situations by not externalizing the eating disorder. So though it may seem very basic, the understanding of what alignment should look like, we often lose sight of what it actually is when we're in the heat of the moment. and we look upon our loved one as maybe causing or voluntarily moving forward with some of these thoughts or behaviors, when in fact that is not the case. So what are some possible models for alignment? These just a couple that are listed here. There's multiple. We can look upon the healthy self, the healthy aspect of our loved one, as being one aspect. And then there's the ED thoughts, the eating disorder thoughts and behaviors. If that works for you to help you delineate where is my loved one and what is the eating disorder, great. Some people utilize a model looking like alien occupation. My loved one's thoughts have been hijacked, and that works for them. And that's effective if it works. So if you can look at a model of alignment along these paths, and there's multiple, terrific. Or if models like this don't work for you, you can change your perspective. And you can simply choose to abandon these metaphors that get in the way or derail you from moving forward. I wouldn't want you to get stuck analyzing for too long, externalizing the eating disorder. What we want to do is just choose something that works and move forward. So you could abandon the metaphors and simply see what you're experiencing, what your loved one is expressing, what they're thinking, and the behaviors as signs of malnourishment, where weight stabilization or restoration is necessary. So let's take a look at the situation that we find ourselves in when we're confronted with change. First, I want to just talk briefly about cognitive dissonance. It happens when our thoughts about something don't align with our actions. How do we resolve this dissonance? We resolve it by changing our actions or our thoughts so they align. What's another perspective on this? As we enter into a situation where we're maybe being exposed to resources, to new learning that may challenge our values or challenge the perspective that we currently hold, that can cause some cognitive dissonance, and it can be challenging because we want to naturally resolve that. So how you resolve that is important for how effectively you move forward. Do you eradicate the thoughts and the knowledge that may conflict with what you feel is right? Or are you willing to hold those thoughts and that new learning to find out what's effective? So that's, we want to keep in mind cognitive dissonance. It's not a bad thing. It's actually quite productive to experience it and move through the process of what's effective. Analysis paralysis and patching the boat while rowing forward can be summed up in this manner. Often we find we're unable to possibly move forward and make an effective decision without having volumes of information. And often that is looking like maybe perfectionism. We want to have the vast pool of knowledge before we move forward. That's where patching the boat while rowing forward comes into play. And we want to get our loved one, if we're going to use a metaphor of a boat and maybe rowing to shore, and perhaps the boat is damaged at this moment. There's challenges and it needs to be patched. While we're rowing that boat towards safety, towards the shore, complete recovery, weight stabilization or restoration, we're also patching the boat, but we're taking action as we're learning. We're not just waiting for learning to take place and considering options. We're actually moving forward while we're learning. So let's take a look at skills that we can add to our toolbox. Distress tolerance. And I find these to be most helpful as we're in the moments that are exceedingly emotionally charged. However, I find them best practiced outside of those moments. So you can learn the theory here, learn what the tool is, but if you wait to apply it until there's high emotionality and there's a lot of stress surrounding a situation, you probably won't be effective at implementing these tools. So the key is utilize them, practice them, warm up with them during the good times. There's the stop skill. So you've practiced this, let's say, and you're in a situation where there's high emotionality. What does it look like? One of the paradigms within dialectical behavior therapy is that if you engage in a situation, at a minimum, don't make it worse. Okay, so that's one of the, just when you step in or engage, don't make the situation worse. So the stop skill is instrumental here. If we don't know what to say, if we don't know what to do, nor how to necessarily move forward, stop. The acronym stands for, obviously, the first S is for stop. Don't take action. Don't say anything for a moment. Take a step back is the T. That could be a physical step back or metaphorical. Just giving yourself some space and some time to process what is being the O observed. What are you seeing in this particular situation? And just observe the facts, tearing away the emotion that you might be feeling from the facts. We just want to take a look at the facts, observe what's occurring, what is being said. And then the P is proceed mindfully with an objective. Let's look at a meal. The objective is meal completion. Proceeding mindfully, knowing the objective, what's going to be effective as my next step. I want to mention a couple things that are something we can even practice right where you are right now. Half smiling and willing hands. I've talked with many carers who, due to frustration, maybe anger, the reiterative process of doing the same thing over and over, sometimes their body language shows the frustration, the anger. We all know the stance, the crossed arms, and maybe glaring down at the table, waiting for progress. And half smiling and willing hands are not acting. It's not being false. It's actually opening ourselves up to providing the opportunity to possibly use the stop skill. So willing hands just simply, rather than clenched fists or folded arms across the chest or hands on the hips, willing hands simply looks like this. It doesn't look like necessarily where I'm holding my hands up near my face. It could be palms upward, simply resting in your lap while you're seated, rather than clenching and showing your frustration non-verbally, opening up your hands, being willing to observe. The half smiling is, think of the Mona Lisa smile, just a face that shows you're observing and you're not making a determination of the facts of what you're observing. You're observing, relaxing your face, forehead to chin, and half smiling. Not a lot to smile about in many moments of eating disorder, treatment, and recovery, and supporting our loved ones. And the half smiling isn't about showing joy necessarily, as much as it is trying to also change our chemistry. By showing willing hands, by having a half smile on your face, you open yourself up to relaxing in that moment. Mentioned this a little bit earlier, willfulness and willingness. Let's just look at how they're defined. And maybe we all find ourselves in many moments of the day being willful. And that's okay, as long as we know that willingness is something we could move toward. So not looking to eradicate willfulness and spend our energy eradicating, as much as understanding we can move toward being willing. Willfulness, responding in terms of your own needs, fighting the current reality, and doing what you feel is right, regardless of effectiveness. It often looks like something where, as you're speaking with another carer or with your loved one, you might utilize terms like, I hear what you're saying, yes, but. And we can talk a little bit more about validation in a bit. It's that but that is simply qualifying the yes and making it irrelevant. Let's look at willingness. responding in terms of what a situation calls for, accepting the current reality, and doing what is effective. Now notice it doesn't say you're agreeing or that you like the current reality. It's just that you're accepting the current reality. It is what it is for now. And I'm going to step back, metaphorically possibly, in order to become a better problem solver. This is often referenced by yes and, being a little more inclusive, understanding that as you're observing the facts of a situation, you still have more observing to do. So there's always an and as you move forward. Mentioned validation, and this is really integral. Early on in phase 1 of treatment, absolutely, and all through treatment, and it's a life skill. Validating can be boiled down to 3 steps. There's many other levels of validation, but let's talk about the 3 steps. And maybe after when I take these slides down, we can talk about what it looks like in reality when you're speaking with your loved one, either verbally or non-verbally. Reflection is the first step. Demonstrate active listening. Repeat what you heard. So remember, we want to be calm because often what we hear is very emotional. And there could be raised voices, there could be yelling. And there are aspects of that that we want to reflect. Not necessarily at the same emotional level, but reflect to show that we heard. We heard and we're bringing in the emotion, the valid communication of the emotion. Clarification. Asking a question to crystallize that the communication you heard is what needed to be expressed. So you might ask a question like what? You've heard your loved one say they have a headache, their stomach is full and they can't move forward any further with this meal. My stomach hurts. And to clarify, now I know the response that can come or the reaction may not be necessarily complimentary or showing traction, but you can ask to clarify, could I get you an ice pack? That's a clarifying question. Would that be helpful? Would that be effective in this moment? I'm fully aware the answer may come as something that is even more emotion laden. Normalization. The third step, verbalize and show understanding and acceptance. And also make your loved one aware, I'd likely feel the same way in your position. Okay, just normalize what they're experiencing. I want to give a visual for validation. A dad mentioned to me about a week and a half ago this metaphor, which I think is helpful, at least it was for me, so I wanted to share it. He saw himself often at the beginning of eating disorder treatment at the top of a stairwell, yelling down to his loved one who was at the bottom of the stairwell, directing her what to do. And he found himself being ineffective until he descended the stairwell, metaphorically, and occupied her perspective and supported her to begin moving up the stairwell, understanding there were going to be possible steps back down the stairwell. And then they would proceed again and possibly plateau. But he found himself being more effective when he validated, he reflected, he clarified, he normalized than when he directed at the top of the stairs. So look at validation as occupying someone else's experience and letting them know that they're being heard. Okay, so we can talk a little bit more about what some of the phrases might sound like in your particular situation. Self-care. This sounds really surreal to most carers. When you hear self-care, you say, I don't have time. I don't have time for that. You don't understand how busy I am trying to support my loved one. And I do understand. So I want to help you be mindfully kind to yourself by possibly for now, not forever, removing those ideas of self-care that are extravagant and that you know at this moment are unachievable. Let's bring it a little closer down to reality. And let's start on the right-hand side of the screen rather than starting on the left, which would be intuitive. Let's start with the little stuff. Time. Occasionally during the week, do you have time to take a shower? Do you have time to take a bath? There's a segment of time, there's a chunk, and it may not at this point be every day. I completely understand that. But there is that chunk of time. Do you have an opportunity to take the garbage out? Do you have an opportunity to do any task that just takes a couple minutes, or could you step outside the house briefly? If you're the primary caregiver, I know it's difficult, but a chunk of time that you can step away momentarily is being mindfully kind to yourself. And sometimes we need to find those moments and make sure we utilize them, even if they are broken chunks of time. You might not have the 3-hour window, but you may have the 3-minute window. Space. It could be metaphorical. You could go on a mind vacation briefly, or you may need to, in fact, step away from the scene. Allowing yourself a little bit of space is the next level of being mindfully kind to yourself so that you can rejuvenate. It's the old adage of on an airplane, if there's an emergency, put your oxygen mask on first. You need to do that before you can help your child, to make sure that you're there and conscious to help your child. Sometimes space allows that. Forgiveness. We don't necessarily think of this as self-care, but it is. This is vital. What you didn't know when you didn't know it, or didn't say when you didn't know what to say, we need to forgive ourselves for that. Even if there's things today that we have said or done, we do need to move forward and be effective. So a little bit of forgiveness, seeking it if necessary from other carers on the scene, but not allowing things that have happened and possibly boiled over to stop us from being effective for any lengthy period of time. Forgiving ourselves, seeking it when necessary. Expression of emotion. I mentioned going into the shower, going into the bathtub, however that looks, whatever space or time you can grab, also expressing your emotion during that time or to someone else. And that's why I love groups, because when you get together with people who are experiencing the same thing you are, maybe in different phases, true, but you understand you have people that you can seek support through and with. Opposite action. This is definitely one that you want to learn and practice so that you can pass it along to your loved one. Does the day become problematic, and I understand you're tired, when you sit down on the couch? Does the afternoon snack not get accomplished? Is dinner not necessarily on time and becomes more stressful? Do things fall apart at any particular point during your day, and can you pinpoint that particular occurrence? Take opposite action then. If you know that going over to the couch leads to possible challenges in terms of not getting things done that need to get done, possibly think about setting an alarm for yourself. Sit on the couch, but understand, I'm going to get up and move forward. I am tired. I'm going to move forward. I took a little time for myself, a little bit of space. I'm going to take the opposite action now and seek to be effective for the remainder of the day. An opposite action also applies to forgiveness. If you have not forgiven yourself for some of the things that may have occurred, look toward forgiving yourself so you can move forward effectively. The pleasant thoughts and events looms large over there on the left-hand side of the screen. It's the things that are surreal at the moment. Those golf weekends, those spa trips, the evening out with your spouse, your friends, however that looks, which might not be achievable right now, and that's okay. And as we move through this process of being mindfully kind to ourselves and move our loved one closer onto the path of recovery, that will return into our self-care repertoire. So I know I mentioned some things there that I'd like to talk about after the presentation. I certainly want to do that. And I also want to make you aware of, as Sabrina mentioned, some additional resources. I'll certainly leave the screen here for a few moments. As I point out some of the things that I certainly want to talk about, I want to learn about your scenarios and certainly take questions. If around validation, that's one point that I'd specifically like to talk about. I find it helps to give carers traction. Okay, I'm just going to move forward here briefly. So contact information for Equip, if you would like to take note of that. And I'd like to open up to questions, and I will take this off, stop sharing so that we can certainly see one another. So thank you for your patience. Please, any questions, I will pop open the chat and see if there's anything there that I should address right off the bat. Yes, please, Sabrina, was that you?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you and to check, because usually I have the questions. A lot of the questions have been coming to me directly. So I will deliver that, which is usually I do. So I'm happy to deliver some of the themes that have been going on while you're presenting.
Okay.
And then also encourage, if you haven't already, please do send in some questions. So, and I want to, let me just check here a setting. So Kevin, thank you so much, because that was a lot of information. And I know that, so we have a lot of people joining right now within, you mentioned being in a support space and recognizing how we all can be in such different spaces. Some people are just learning about eating disorders. Some have, been through treatment programs with their loved one a couple times and are wondering, okay, what do we do now? We've put efforts. Still, it's a really complicated illness. So you were just talking about validation, and I want to also highlight that sometimes this work is very frustrating. And because it's very individualized and unique for families. So I am grateful for all the skills that you just shared. And a lot of the kind of comments and questions we've been getting is, how do we be there as a caregiver when our loved one might not really be motivated for recovery? And I recognize, appreciate you shared your experience with your own family and your daughter. And, you work with a lot of families coming from a lot of different experiences. Can you share a little bit for families who are really kind of feeling stuck right now?
Absolutely. So maybe a broad theme would be especially early on in treatment. So I'll speak specifically about that, but I hear you loud and clear, Sabrina, about folks who may have been in numerous treatment contexts. So we wouldn't recommend waiting for our loved ones to decide upon recovery. That's why we're there early on as parents, family members, carers, to support them towards recovery when they can't do it on their own. And when I say can't, I really don't like to use that word. However, let me point out something that they're experiencing, which I discussed in these slides. When the nutrition prescription, or as the plate is placed in front of them, their reaction is fear, anxiety, stress, anger, frustration, and around particular subjects, shape, weight, calories, movement in general, they are being inhibited with a stress response. So they're working out of their limbic system, the reptilian brain. And us asking them to move forward with seeking recovery, a higher level thought, maybe engaging in individualized therapy very early on in treatment before there's been weight restoration, is something that would probably, in most cases, be ineffective. So we're making the decision for them to move them forward because we recognize where they're operating around particular subjects and when faced with particular fears. So waiting for them to seek recovery is something that we'll look for later on in treatment, but certainly in the early stages, it's the job for carers to support them in that direction. Does that help address, Sabrina, the theme?
I think it was a well answered response. And I'll invite if anybody wants to continue sharing their feedback to send me a message so I can relay. And yeah, I'll just echo that, you're trying to help break down that eating disorders they're very layered and they're very challenging to understand when it's not something that an individual has experienced themselves. On the outside, it almost appears very nonsensical, right? Or like, okay, I know this person has this information or knows better, and somehow that intellect and knowledge doesn't align with the limbics, with what you're describing, how our brain is simply responding to fear and discomfort. So the next question I'd like to move into is about diagnoses. And I have some thoughts on this myself, Kevin. I'm very curious about the work that you've had with caregivers. What is important, or where do you find it meaningful to discuss with caregivers about how much education they may need to have around a specific diagnosis for their caregiver or for their loved one, or maybe even when is there flexibility around that? Maybe I'll say that and let you respond.
Sure. For carers early on or at any stage of treatment, let's be realistic. We're task laden, and we're under stress, and we're not necessarily able to bring in large amounts of information. We're trying to juggle so many things, and whether that looks like work, siblings of the one of our children who's affected by an eating disorder, a spouse, partner, there's a lot that we are trying to juggle. And when we're juggling the rubber balls, glass balls, we understand that our family, our loved one, they are glass balls. The rubber balls, some of those can drop. We'll pick them up another day. So education and learning is incremental. And when we try to bring it all on at once and gather as much as possible and dive into it, we can experience some overwhelm. There's a lot. And I think the burden of trying to bring put everything in or under our belt is something that is probably rendering us ineffective. So incremental learning, making a plan and understanding that you're patching the boat while you're rowing it forward. Taking that next effective action is really the process here. So what is the next effective action? The next effective action is, as you're looking at a list of objectives and your eventual goal, goal being complete recovery, what objectives have we placed along the path? If summer vacation is an objective, making a realistic determination prior to putting the deposit down or prior to leaving on the vacation, what challenges will we be facing? And realistically, will we be able to manage those effectively? And what are our defaults that we are going to go to in terms of managing those processes? So very incremental education, rather than thinking we need to become experts on every aspect, every diagnosis. Working with your team to find out and what they would recommend, and knowing that they are consultants and your loved one best, and melding those two perspectives is vital.
Well said. I concur because I know that it can be overwhelming with a lot of information, and that's the first thing. It's natural for our brains to say, "I don't understand, so I want to get as much information as I can, and then give that to my loved one so that they can get better." And you're spot on with incremental learning because every single individual has a different relationship that they've developed with their eating disorder. So we're not only learning about this kind of this grand illness, but actually like what is it for my loved ones specifically? I'd just like to add that as far as diagnoses and terminology goes, one thing that many people don't know is that eating disorder diagnoses aren't always such a clear cut kind of box where everybody feels like they identify and fit into. So if your loved one is sharing with you that something feels like, well, that's not what's going on with me, right? They're trying to even explain a little bit more. Um, just listen to them, because it may not be what you've read, but their experience is the most important thing. So there's so much to learn from what they're trying to say, and they're also discovering how to say it too. Kevin, so I know some of what you've talked about is from maybe working with younger age individuals, or say like we have even families that might have power of attorney because they're working, their loved one is under 18. As far as working with adults, so we have someone who shares, if someone has gone to treatment and then they come home and then you're kind of sitting at the table with them and you're observing them struggle, what are some, like, how do we be in that moment with them? I know you shared a lot of tips kind of cognitively, but what can we do when we're sitting around the table watching our loved ones struggle with their meal? Kevin, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to pause you. I'm getting some messages that the audio is not going through.
Ah, okay. Is it going through now? Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. I heard a beep, but as long as we're back on, fantastic. I think that validating is the first step. Letting your loved one know, no matter the age, that you're there with them. And if you don't know the words to say, being there with them and letting them know, here's some words, here's some phrases. I can see this is really challenging for you. I hear you expressing this particular emotion. Tending away from words like I know or I understand, because we don't know or understand, and those are easily and very effectively rebutted. So sharing someone's perspective means knowing inside we will never occupy that person's experience fully, but we are working toward understanding. So I can see that you're struggling right now. What can I do to be a better support for you in this moment? So your loved one, no matter the age, is there at the table with you, and you can see they're struggling. That acknowledgement can come through with non-verbally, not showing the frustration that we would all feel naturally. We want our loved one to not be suffering. And it's challenging for us to hide that frustration because we want something for them. But again, that's us being willful. Being willing means understanding right now they need us to simply be there and show with willing hands, a half smile, maybe taking opposite action from the way we have in the past conducted our support, and moving forward in that way, validating, certainly, reflecting, clarifying, normalizing, And again, if you don't get the words just right, that's okay. Being there with them, asking, what can I do to best support you in this moment? It might sound clunky and it might sound very robotic, but you can also be transparent and let your loved one know, I'm learning some new tools. I'm transparent. These are important tools to help me be a better support for you.
Thank you, Kevin. We have just a couple of minutes, and I do have like a lot of questions and a lot of comments, and I know a lot of families right now are very eager to understand how to apply all of this to their loved one and their families. So I just want to take a moment to encourage everyone that this is a journey that, I mean, if you're a caregiver, no one was prepared for this, right? We're not raised to have these really specific, deep skills. And so it is a major learning curve. It is for your loved one as well. So I just want to share to not give up hope, though sometimes frustration is and overwhelm with information and being told different things, maybe from different providers, can feel like there isn't another option. As Kevin mentioned, this is why there are groups created and mentorship programs, because we're not really meant to do this alone. And I mean, when I say we, caregivers as well, because I do a lot of work with individuals also. But Kevin, earlier when you mentioned self-care, that is just one of the most critical pieces when you're being a caregiver for someone, because we simply are not able to have the space and the energy to give if we're not first doing what we need to, which is very difficult. Our culture isn't exactly supportive of that, I would argue. So, Kevin, before we wrap up, would you just share a few thoughts for families right now who are feeling overwhelmed and feeling like maybe we don't know where to go next?
I think one of the most important phrases, Sabrina, that I kept reiterating was become a beginner. Become a beginner. 3 years into the process, I made sure that I reiterated that daily. Become a beginner. 4 years into the process, become a beginner. Continue learning. Continue knowing that maybe some on this call know what a box score is, but let me explain. It's where, as you're following a team, you can keep track of their wins and losses. And let's not look at losses here. Let's look at W's and L's, but wins and learning opportunities. Where are the points of progress? Keeping track of the points of progress is often something we as carers, we lose sight of because of the reiterative process. And I'd urge you, look toward those points of progress as being very clear clues you're on the right path. And look at the learning opportunities not as that dirty word failure. Learning opportunities means I can take out another tool from my belt or go grab a tool that I learned and practice its use and implement. So I think becoming a beginner is a mantra. And no matter what age we are, and as much as we've been through, becoming a beginner just simply opens us up to not laying out that tripwire in front of us that we continually fall over, or maybe throw marbles in front of ourselves as we're trying to dance. We are learning as we go. We're beginners. And if we keep that mindset, we're open to a lot of possibilities that often we trap ourselves when we just have one perspective. So become a beginner.
The beginner's mindset. Kevin, thank you so much for your time and experience. I will send a recording to everyone who is registered, and this will be put on YouTube as well. And one more time, I'll add information if anybody has follow-up questions and needs to reach out to EQUIP or to the Eating Disorder Foundation. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a restful evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sabrina.